called Operation Midway Blitz. A suburban Chicago father and his one-year-old daughter, Ariana, were pepper sprayed by federal immigration agents as they headed to the grocery store. They were quickly rushed to a nearby hospital where doctors called poison control in Atlanta for advice. Since the pepper spraying, Ariana has been more clingy and unsettled. No surprise any father or grandfather knows this story. She is too young to understand what happened to her family, but she doesn't want to be left alone anymore. The Trump Department of Homeland Security rescinded a policy that limited ICE raids at schools, child care centers, and other places where children play and learn. Why were these restrictions in place to prevent ICE from raiding schools and child care centers? Because the harm we know happens to children when they experience this trauma. Witnessing a parent being detained or fearing that a parent will be taken away can have a lasting emotional scar on a child. Take my late constituent, Ophelia Torres, who passed away last month at 16 years of age, student at Lakeview High School. Her father was ripped away from her as she battled cancer. He was in a Home Depot parking lot trying to pick up an odd job. They came and arrested him, and he begged them to let him finish the job or at least go home to his daughter, who just got back from the hospital for brain cancer. They refused. They took him away for 2 weeks. They had to stop treatment because of the stress of her father on her personally. Or the 3-year-old who witnessed his father being detained at a traffic stop. Now, whenever he hears sirens, hides under tables and starts crying uncontrollably. His preschool teacher said, quote, "He doesn't understand immigration policy. He just knows someone took his dad." Today, doctors, educators, child care providers, and parents are struggling to help kids navigate the impacts of mass deportation. This administration has restarted the inhumane practice of family detention. Under the best of circumstances, family detention is costly, ineffective, and exposes children to lasting trauma. But under this administration, families in detention have received food contaminated with worms and mold. They have struggled to obtain water for formula and medical care for babies and children. This includes Amalia, an 18-month-old baby, 18 months, who became so sick with a respiratory illness she was hospitalized for 10 days only to be returned to detention and denied medication. In the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill that we passed last year without any Democratic votes, Republicans gave the Department of Homeland Security $45 billion for immigration detention, including family detention. Yet the Trump DHS cannot find the money to get kids safe food and medicine. In fact, after children wrote letters from Dilley, one of the detention centers, about conditions there, guards took away their art supplies. The cruelty is the point. Thankfully, the American people are rejecting this depravity. Educators like our witness, Maria, have worked tirelessly to protect their kids and help them navigate the cruelty of this campaign. Neighbors have volunteered to drop children off at school. Students around the country, including 2 of our witnesses here today, have stood up for their classmates and family members. Congress has to do its part as well. The harms to children are exactly why Democrats have held the line, and with the support of the American people, laid out demands to deal with the Department of Homeland Security. The demands are simple and include ending roving patrols that lead to children and babies being tear gassed, and ending indiscriminate arrests that tear apart some families, put others in detention. And we must pass a path to citizenship, something I worked on for more than 2 decades, to give stability to families and communities. It's long overdue. Today we have 5 witnesses. I'm going to go through a brief description of each. Our first witness is Leah. I met with Leah in her high school in Chicago. She led hundreds of high school students in Little Village, a Hispanic section of Chicago, in a walkout during Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago. She's continued her work to organize students in her community in opposition to administration's mass deportation campaigns. She's a senior. She tells me she's graduating. She's going to take the courses she needs to get into politics. We're sure glad you're here, Leah. I'll recognize you to speak in just a minute.
Talk to me first, Leah.
Angus King of Maine and Mazie Hirono of Hawaii. Our next witness is Laura Mukerjee. Is that right? Perfect. How about that? Directs the Immigrant Rights Clinic at Columbia Law School. Professor Mukerjee represents multiple families that have been detained. Third witness is Maria Heavener. Is that right? First grade teacher at Funston Elementary in Chicago, member of the Chicago Teachers Union. We're glad you're here, Maria. Next witness, Lisa Fortuna, clinical psychologist, professor and chair of the Department of Psychiatry and Neuroscience at the University of California, Riverside. Thanks for making the trip. Our final witness is Samia, a senior in high school in Minnesota and the local student representative on our school board. Before we turn to our witnesses, let me briefly lay out the mechanics. Each witness has 5 minutes to make an opening statement. Then senators will each take 5 minutes for questions. The first to be recognized is Leah. You have 5 minutes. You may proceed.
Good afternoon, Senator Durbin and the Democratic senators. My name is Leah Sofia Lopez, and I'm a 17-year-old high school senior at the Greater Lawndale High School for Social Justice in Chicago. I'm your normal 17-year-old. I like listening to music, hanging out with my friends, and being with my family. My senior year should be one of the best years of my life. I should be preparing for prom and graduation and worrying about what college I want to attend and studying for finals. Instead, I find myself worrying whether the color of my skin or the language that my grandparents speak would determine if I belong in this country. My home, little village, is built by a community of hardworking people who want nothing more than to provide for their families. It is vibrant, beautiful, and deeply rooted in Latino culture. I have lived here my whole life, and this community is very close to my heart. On October 22nd, I was in my fourth period class when I saw videos of ICE agents attacking multiple people in Little Village, Berwyn, and Cicero. I will never forget that day. I've never felt that much anger and fear before. At the start of 2025, the Trump administration launched Operation Midway Blitz. For months, people in our community were afraid to speak and afraid to leave their homes. The school hallways were left empty because kids didn't want to risk the safety of their own families. My own friend had to watch her cousin and uncle be thrown to the ground by ICE agents with a knee pressed on her cousin's neck while he yelled that he was a citizen. I've seen kids my age or younger get thrown to the ground for just recording. I've seen tear gas being used against peaceful protesters, and I was scared. In theory, I shouldn't have to worry. Me and my family are citizens, but that doesn't change the fact that we look like immigrants. It doesn't change the fear that I've seen in my friends' eyes as they worry if their parents made it home safely. Families who have built their lives here are being ripped away from everything they know and love. After months of fear and anger, my friends and I decided we had enough. We organized a student walkout on October 28th, 2025. That day, after months of feeling terrorized, I finally saw hope. I saw hope in not only my classmates, but also in our community. People standing together and refusing to stay silent. But that hope didn't last. While we were protesting, my friend's father, Orancio, was leaving Home Depot when multiple ICE agents stopped and detained him without even knowing if he was a citizen or not. They took him to Broadview Detention Center. The conditions there were horrible. He described overcrowded spaces, a lack of hygiene products, and very little food or water. Detainees received only 2 small water bottles per day, and when those ran out, some people had the choice but to drink toilet water. And when reporters came in, the facility was cleaned up, and it appeared as though everything was fine. These masked men claim to protect our country from criminals, and they claim to follow the law. But the truth is, our communities are being terrorized. They killed our own people. They're detaining our own children. They are the criminals. A 17-year-old should not have to sit in front of her own government and explain how inhumane and corrupt this system is. But here I am. I'm here to speak for my friends, my classmates, my coworkers, my community, and the many people across this country who have experienced these injustices. It is a time to put a stop to a system that tears families apart. a system that destroys the lives of millions of Americans, citizens or not. It is time that our leaders speak out against this harm and hold the Trump administration and the Department of Homeland Security accountable for what they have done. Because what's supposed to make America great is not hatred or division. It is our unity, our diversity, and the belief that no matter how anyone looks, where they come from, or what language they speak, deserves dignity and respect. Everyone deserves the right to live a life of liberty and the pursuit of happiness. I hope that one day, no 17-year-old has to stand in front of their own government to beg to feel safe in their own community. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Laura?
Good afternoon, Ranking Member Durbin and all the other Democratic senators. My name is Leah Mukerjee. I'm a clinical professor at Columbia Law School and director of the Immigrants' Rights Clinic. Since last summer, I've represented 68 children and parents who've been detained at the Family Detention Center in Dilley, Texas. My youngest clients have been babies and toddlers, just one.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Those photographs are blocking the people from seeing anything in the back, so could you, if you could just put them off to the side. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. My youngest clients have been babies and toddlers, just 1 and 2 years old. I've spent the past 9 months trying to restore freedom for these children and give them a fair opportunity to stay in the United States. Over the past year, children have been arrested and detained across the United States, at airports, at the border, at immigration courthouses, at immigration check-in appointments, on their way to and from school, in parks, and in emergency room parking lots as they're trying to seek urgent medical care. From January to October 2025, more than 3,800 children were arrested by federal immigration authorities, including 20 infants. 1,700 of these children, more than that, have been detained and held at family detention centers. 20 days is the general legal limit for how long a child accompanied by their parent can be in federal immigration custody. But more than 900 children have been detained past that 20-day mark, and 270 of those children have been detained more than 40 days. I'd like to introduce you to some of the families who I've worked with at Dilley in recent weeks since they couldn't be here themselves. I'd like to start with 1-year-old baby Amalia, who you mentioned, Senator Durbin. She was detained at Dilley for 57 days. She and her parents entered the United States lawfully. They complied with all their immigration check-in requirements. They attended church weekly, and they were arrested in December when they showed up for an immigration check-in appointment as required. Amalia nearly died at Dilley. After weeks of persistent and high fevers, vomiting, and diarrhea, medical staff at Dilley finally called 911 on January 18th. By that point, her blood oxygen levels had plummeted to the 50s when they should have been closer to 100. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed her with pneumonia, RSV, bronchitis, COVID-19, and an ear infection. After 10 days of specialized care in the hospital, ICE made the decision to return this baby back to the Dilley Family Detention Center, where they denied her access to the medication prescribed at the hospital, and where she was again exposed to myriad viruses amidst hundreds of detained children and parents during a measles outbreak. It took filing a federal habeas petition for Amalia to be released on February 6th. She and her parents are now trying to recover in California. Here on this side is 9-year-old Kanek. He was detained at Dilley for 85 days. He and his mother entered the United States lawfully, and they were arrested when they were on their way to pick up prescription medication for Kanek. Kanek has severe autism. He could not understand why he was detained at Dilley for weeks on end. While he was at Dilley, he grew increasingly distressed, increasingly disoriented. He began hitting himself, crying through the night, and begging to return to his home and his school in Louisiana. He could not stand the lights being on 24/7 or the noise of patrolling guards at night. Kanek was finally released on March 6th after our clinic filed a parole request for him. He is now trying to recover in Louisiana. Over there, we have 5-year-old twins, Alexander and Anna, who were detained at Dilley for 124 days with their parents, Anastasia and Alexei, who are political dissidents from Russia. In detention, Anna and Alexander were repeatedly sick with fevers, vomiting, and cough. They had stomach pain, constipation, and diarrhea, and these 5-year-olds often refused to eat. They had difficulty sleeping, and their mental health deteriorated. They asked, "Are we bad people? Do the guards want to kill us? Will we ever get out?" One night at Dilley, their mother heard a strange sound coming from Alexander's bed. She went to check on him and found that he had managed to pull the drawstring out of his sweatpants, put it around his neck, and he was pulling it tightly, believing at the age of 5 that it would be better to die than remain in detention. Luckily, this family was released on February 6th after I filed a parole request for them. They are now recovering in California. Over here, we have 4-year-old Konstantin, 12-year-old Camila, and 14-year-old Kirill. They were detained at Dilley for 136 days. Camila spent her 12th birthday in detention, though she and her family had done nothing wrong. Camila suffered from an ear infection at Dilley, which left her with hearing loss. She suffers from partial hearing loss to this day. At Dilley, her younger brother was terrified of the guards, and her older brother suffered from repeated panic attacks. The family was released on February 18th after I filed multiple parole requests for them. They are now recovering in California. I'm currently representing 12 additional children and parents who are detained at the Dilley Family Detention Center. This includes a 2-year-old who has been detained for 128 days, and a 15-year-old who has been detained for 148 days. I'm also representing a 5-year-old in detention right now who is nonverbal and has extremely serious medical needs. Overwhelmingly, families at Dilley do not have access to counsel who can help to secure their releases. Even when they do, ICE often rejects, ignores, or denies parole requests. I've met these families who I'm introducing you to after they had been detained at Dilley for months. It's really hard for families detained there to find counsel. Dilley is a hellhole. It's a prison for babies, toddlers, and children. Children and parents detained at Dilley do not have access to sufficient drinking water. Children and parents detained at Dilley have found live worms, bugs, and mold in their meals. The lights are on all night, making it difficult to sleep. ICE pays a private for-profit prison corporation, Core Civic, $180 million annually to run the Dilley facility. Children and families should be immediately released from Dilley. Alternatives to detention programs are far more cost-effective and humane than detaining children. Protecting children from needless cruelty is not an enormous ask. It is what our humanity demands of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maria?
Ranking Member Durbin and members of the Senate, I thank you for having me to this important hearing and for having the hearing in the first place. My name is Maria Heavner, and I'm a first grade teacher at Funston Elementary in Chicago, where I'm a proud member of Local 1 of the AFT, the Chicago Teachers Union. CTU negotiated provisions into our contract with the school district to protect students, families, and staff from federal immigration enforcement at the schools without a judicial warrant. When we heard of Operation Midway Blitz, we knew we needed to do more. We handed out whistles, we formed group chats, and informed the community of their rights. We volunteered to arrive early and stay late to stand watch outside of our school buildings. We made a plan to protect our students. And we hoped that it would all be a drill that would never be needed. But on Friday, October 3rd, 2025, when our community was attacked with tear gas by masked federal agents, it became clear to us that it was up to us to keep each other safe. I was in my classroom that day teaching literacy. My windows were open because it was such a beautiful day. A loud commotion outside interrupted our reading lesson. First, we heard helicopters, then horns and whistles and sirens. As I began closing my windows, my phone began to ping with notifications in rapid succession. Another teacher said she had seen ICE outside of the grocery store across the street. She immediately began alerting the community with her whistle. A crowd of neighbors quickly formed. As my colleague ran back to the school for safety, the agents rolled down their windows and tossed multiple tear gas canisters at our community. Our neighborhood was under attack by federal agents. A toddler and their parent were just leaving the grocery store, and they were overcome with chemicals and received medical treatment from neighbors in the street. It was total chaos. We implemented the protocols that we had hoped we'd never have to use. Students were brought in from recess, just narrowly saving them from inhaling chemicals. Windows were closed, and we were in a soft lockdown. All day, federal agents circled area schools in predominantly Hispanic and Latino neighborhoods. Teachers from at least 6 other schools said that agents were spotted near their campuses as well. I started my teaching career as events like Sandy Hook were beginning to unfold. I am accustomed to being prepared for threats to our safety. And this was the scariest day of my teaching career. But for the sake of our students, we had to stay calm and continue teaching, even as we worried about what would happen during dismissal. Would the ICE agents return? Our planning and protocols ultimately worked. Neighbors arrived en masse, lining the streets to create safe passage as students and families walked home together. But the community was left feeling shocked and violated. As educators, we are in the business of protecting our students, but we shouldn't have to protect them from the federal government. Schools should not feel like war zones. The following Monday, my students were fearful and anxious. 6-year-olds were asking me what a tear gas canister does. They repeatedly asked, why? Why do they want to take people? 2 weeks later, one of my students had a panic attack in class. His little body froze. His eyes welled up in tears, and he began to shake. He worried that his family members would be taken because they have dark skin, even though they are citizens from Puerto Rico. Our youngest students are still dealing with anxiety even now. Our counselors have noted a sizable increase in behavioral health referrals since last October, mostly for students exhibiting signs of depression and anxiety. Attendance dropped in the fall because some families were too afraid to walk their children to school. Our teaching staff is living in a state of hypervigilance, which is stressful and exhausting. Senators, the teachers, students, and parents of Chicago want our government to invest in our schools, not in weapons to attack them. Our students need access to educational resources and nutrition, not ICE agents circling around our school buildings. We will keep doing our part to keep our children safe and happy so they can learn. We need and expect this Congress to do the same. As an educator and a citizen, I hope this Congress will ask the hard questions and work with educators to ensure that our public schools remain safe, welcoming, and thriving places for all. To get there, senators, we must be willing to acknowledge the harm being done. Thank you for your time and for hearing my story.
Thank you, Maria. Dr. Fortuna, you've come a long way. We're glad to have you. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Ranking Member Durbin and Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today. As was mentioned, my name is Dr. Lisa Fortuna. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and for more than 2 decades, my research and clinical work have focused on immigrant and refugee mental health, trauma, and health disparities across the lifespan. I've also contributed to national studies of mental health in immigrant populations, including work related to the National Latino and Asian American Study, one of the largest epidemiological studies of mental health among immigrant communities in the United States. And I say this because for more than 2 decades, I know that I can speak about the impact of immigration enforcement environments on children and adolescents and on the families and communities that support them. over more than 2 decades of clinical care and research with immigrant and refugee communities, I have learned a simple but important truth. Children experience policy and the environment that we create for them through the lens of safety, essential for their development. When children feel that their parents, homes, schools, or communities are unsafe, their brains and their bodies respond with fear. And when that fear becomes chronic, it can shape emotional development, learning, and health for many years to come, for a lifetime, potentially. From a child mental health perspective, these effects are not theoretical. They are clinical realities that many of us are seeing across the country in pediatric clinics, schools, and community mental health settings. I've also worked with unaccompanied minors, many of them who are in our communities, whom arrive in the United States after experiencing violence, loss, and dangerous migration journeys. These youth often already present with symptoms of trauma, hypervigilance, sleep disturbance, depression, and persistent anxiety about their safety and future. And I know the most healing things that we could do is to provide them support and welcoming and humanity. For children held in federal custody, including in detention and HHS shelters, the concern is not only the physical setting, but the cumulative burden of displacement, uncertainty, separation from loved ones, and prolonged time in custody. For many children, these experiences occur on top of a prior exposure to violence, migration, trauma, and loss. When these layers of stress accumulate, the risk for long-term mental health consequences, including post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety disorders, and in some cases, as we've heard today, suicidal thoughts or behaviors. Decades of research also show that heightened immigration enforcement environments are associated with this increased anxiety, depression, and sleep disturbances, school disengagement and learning problems, and disruptions in healthcare among children in immigrant families. But I also want to share that these impacts also extend to other families. First, mixed status families, where children who are U.S. citizens live with parents who may lack legal status. In these families, children often live with the daily fear that a parent may not come home from their work or could disappear. For example, I treated a young elementary school student whose parent was detained during an enforcement action, and after the event, the child developed severe separation anxiety and began refusing to attend school, terrified that other family members might also disappear. The child experiences frequent nightmares and physical symptoms such as stomach pain before school. But increasingly, we are seeing something new and deeply concerning. Fear is spreading beyond immigrant families into entirely U.S. citizen families. Children who are citizens and whose parents are citizens are expressing fear that they or their loved ones could be taken away simply because they are perceived as immigrants because of the color of their skin, and that they belong to communities that have become focus of enforcement. For example, a U.S. citizen mother told me her high school-aged son came home from school in tears, terrified that he himself might be deported. This young person is a citizen. All of his immediate family members are citizens. Yet the climate of fear surrounding immigration enforcement has become so pervasive that he believed he might be taken away from the country where he was born and that his friends were in danger. Across these different situations, a common thread emerges: the psychological burden created by uncertainty, family separation, chronic fear. These experiences can profoundly shape children's emotional and development and their sense of safety and stability. And one of the most important things to understand is that these effects of immigration enforcement do not stop with the individual who is detained or deported, as bad as that is. They ripple outward, across families, classrooms, and entire communities, as we're hearing today. Children experience these policies not only through direct encounters, but also through the broader climate surrounding them. Even when enforcement does not occur in a child's household, children are acutely aware of what is happening around them. They hear adults speaking in fearful tones. They see neighbors disappear. They watch classmates suddenly stop coming to school. For children, this creates a state of chronic vigilance, a persistent sense that something terrible may happen at any moment, and it has been. And decades of research on toxic stress show that chronic fear of this kind can interfere with emotional regulation, learning, sleep, and long-term mental health. What clinicians and educators and communities are observing is the creation of environments created by chronic fear and instability for our children, conditions that decades of research show can negatively affect mental health and health outcomes across the life course. Children experience immigration enforcement not as an abstract policy debate, but as fear, loss, disrupted attachment, and uncertainty about whether the people who care for them will still be here tomorrow. So as physicians, scientists, and educators and policymakers, we share a responsibility to ensure that the systems shaping children's lives in our country protect their safety, their development, and their well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Samia, my notes say that you are a high school student in the Twin Cities in Minnesota.
Yes,
We're glad you're here today. Please proceed.
thank you. Ranking Member Durbin, members of the Senate, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about the impacts of mass deportations on children. My name is Samia Mahmoud, and I am from a suburb just outside of Minneapolis in Minnesota. I am a senior in high school. I am a student school board representative, and I am a community member that gives back to the people who provide for me. Before I talk about these impacts, I want to relay a quote to you said by our very own president. Filthy, disgusting, dirty, ridden with crime. The only thing they know how to go after is ships. That's exactly what he said about the Somali community in Minnesota and all across the United States. Yet this rhetoric hasn't just been said about the Somali community. It is said about the Hispanic community and many other communities that are present in Minnesota and all across the United States. Operation Metro Surge began early in December of last year, where 3,000 federal agents were deployed into the Twin Cities and the surrounding area. This impact that this operation left was devastating on our community. People who weren't the Trump administration's typical American started fearing for their lives, hiding in their homes. Children weren't going to school. I want to talk about the fear that not only I have felt for the last few months, but also my classmates. I was not able to go outside by myself without a person with me. I started carrying my passport after a brief personal experience with ICE agents at my local grocery store. But not only that, during our youth in government program, where we were present at the Capitol, 1,600 students were present at the Minnesota Capitol. ICE agents decided to have a press conference. Students had to evacuate to the basement of the Minnesota Capitol, and that traumatized us deeply. The fear that we felt in that moment where we were practicing being in legislature, practicing being Supreme Court justices was very real. This has affected our community greatly because everything leads up to one question: what if I'm next? This issue is not an issue of political polarization. It is not an issue of red versus blue. It is not an issue that isn't about humanity. This is an issue about humanity. I want to talk about three names: Alex Preddy, Renee Good, and Keith Porter. These 3 individuals were murdered at the hands of ICE agents, and the Trump administration demonized them. It was not their fault that they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, and ICE agents decided to use their power to kill these 3 innocent individuals. But that's not it. People were deported from Minnesota. Families were separated. People were impacted. Students were impacted. But it's not people that the government claims that are the terrorists, that are the criminals, that are the drugsters or the rapists. These are the people who go to school to get an education. These are people like me, where I impact my community by representing my school on the school board, where I testify on behalf of my school at the Minnesota legislature, where I try to get bills pushed through the Minnesota legislature. Every day, ordinary and extraordinary individuals are affected because of the lacking impacts of the ICE immigration enforcement in Minnesota. We are asking for ICE agents to continue to leave from our great state. But it's not only been negatives in our state of Minnesota. Tens of thousands of individuals took to the streets to protest against the Trump administration. And so much so that we actually pressured our federal and state governments to reduce the number of ICE agents present by the thousands. Yet, we want to make sure no ICE agents are present in Minnesota so that students like myself, kids, children in elementary and preschools have the opportunity to go back to their classes, see their classmates' faces and those familiar faces. Thank you.
Sure. Senator King would like to make a statement. He has to leave, and then I'm going to recognize Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I wish every American could hear your testimony, particularly some of the people upstairs. Thank you. That was so important, and I do have to go to an adjacent meeting, but I have a friend who's a priest in Maine, and every now and then he sends me scriptures, and he sent me one this morning that I want to leave you with. This is from Leviticus, written probably 3,000 years ago, but it speaks to us today. When an alien resides with you in your land, do not molest him. You shall treat the alien who resides with you no differently than the natives born among you. You have the same love for him as for yourself, for you too were once aliens in the land of Egypt. That's the responsibility that we have, and that's the responsibility that we're trying to uphold. So thank you again for your testimony. Don't let it stop here. Continue to advocate, continue to speak out, continue to make your voices heard, because that's the only way the walls of oppression are going to come down. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. What an outstanding panel. I do this for a living. Witnesses come before us in panels, several a week. This is extraordinary. You touch my heart. Mazie Hirono, any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have been a person who has been at the forefront of defending immigrants and doing the right thing with regard to the laws that should be fairly applied to all of us, and I'm honored to work with you on the Judiciary Committee. I thank each of you for coming to testify and to tell us the real life impact of what I would describe as ISIS lawlessness. But Mr. Chairman, before I continue with a question, I would like to say that the Homeland Security jurisdiction is over TSA, Coast Guard, and FEMA, and I want to make it very plain to everyone here that the Democrats on this committee, and in fact the Democrats in the Senate, support the funding of these agencies, but we do not support the funding of ICE as long as there are no guardrails around their lawlessness. And so I just wanted to reiterate that distinction. Again, I thank each of you for coming and testifying, and I want to ask each of you that, we have been taking a position that ICE agents should not be going masked. They should have to wear a body camera, that they cannot be dragging people out of cars, beating them, certainly not to murder them. And so there are some common sense guardrails, including the use of force. Would all of you agree that that ICE agents should be held to those kinds of standards?
Yes,
Or
Senator
let's just go
Hirono.
down the line.
Yes, thank you for that question. And yes, I believe that ICE agents should be held to that standard because, again, they claim to protect our country and they claim they follow the laws, but that's farther from the truth. They destroy communities across the country, some that we haven't even seen. So I think it's really important that they document what they do and they show their faces so the citizens and non-citizens feel safe and so they don't feel like they might get taken away from everything they know and love.
Senator Hirono, thank you for that question. I echo everything my distinguished colleague said. I also want to add that in addition to guardrails and accountability, there must be mechanisms for holding ICE officers and other federal law enforcement officers accountable when they engage in wrongdoing, including killings. Thank you.
Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. I believe those guardrails do need to be in place for our students to feel safe, because for our students to feel safe, they need to know that they won't be tackled on their way to school like students were in the Pilsen neighborhood. They need to know that after their parents drop them off, they'll return home safely and won't be shot and killed like the father from Franklin Park, Silverio Villegas Gonzalez.
Yes, I absolutely believe that we have to have guardrails for all the reasons that, the panel is describing. In addition, we try to remember, and we should always remember that every person that is in this country has basic civil and human rights. And what people are really experiencing right now is a complete dissolution of that they do not have rights, that they can be disappeared or taken at any given moment. That's the way that the community is experiencing that. And it goes from children and families. And I think about my colleagues as well who are supporting these families and trying to make sure that their rights and their humanity is upheld. And they too are suffering, and it's creating a very traumatic environment, even for the helpers, which is who are also trying to support. So absolutely.
Maria? Samia, sorry.
Thank
Do you
you.
wanna add?
Yes, thank you, Senator Hirono. Yes, we need to have those guardrails in place because what we see, the actions that are being committed by ICE agents, are a blatant violation of our constitutional rights. And in order for ICE agents to actually have a place in American society, they need to follow the Constitution and they need to respect people's basic human rights. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to particularly thank Leah and Samia for being here because I really commend you. You are high school students, and the kind of awareness that you are exhibiting and sharing with us is extraordinary, and we need that. And it's also very important for all of us to understand that it's not just the families and the individuals who are being targeted by ICE, but the fear and depression and all of that, those kinds of feelings occur throughout the community. And I met with a number of people from Minnesota recently, and one of them said that she is not an immigrant. Hers is not an immigrant family, but her little daughter, I think the daughter was 6 years old, said, "Mommy, is ICE coming for me?" And so the fear spreads throughout the community, and aside from the kind of guardrails that we need to put in place, I think that we are going to need to deal with just the emotional trauma and the mental health needs of our students and our children as we deal with the lawlessness that we see ICE exhibiting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Senator Durbin. I want to thank you, Senator Durbin, for bringing us together. All of you should know, I know many of you do, how important a leader Senator Durbin has been in immigration reform. In my very first days in the United States Senate, I will never forget how profoundly moving his comments were in bringing us together in favor of immigration reform. And believe it or not, the Senate of the United States passed comprehensive immigration reform with his leadership. So for everyone who thinks it is impossible, it's an unaccomplishable dream, Senator Durbin has done it. He's been a champion of the dreamers, and it's an objective that not only can we, but we must achieve. And your advocacy will help us do it. And, you know, Samia, I want to apologize for the President of the United States for what he has said about your community. And I would love for the President to be able to meet you, to hear you, and to listen to the kinds of comments that you've made today, which are so powerful. And I want to thank you and all of the extraordinarily impressive women who are here today representing different perspectives on this common problem. You inspire us. More so than, I can tell you, 99% of the hearings, the formal hearings that we do from that impressive dais. You are just really powerful and meaningful, so never doubt that you are making a difference by being here today. I'd like to ask Ms. Mukerjee a question about the detention center in Dilley, Texas, where no doubt you've been. There's a very informative article in the Atlantic magazine, and you may have seen it, by a Pulitzer Prize-winning author about the conditions there. Just speaking as not only a lawyer, very expert lawyer, but as a human being, how would you react to what you've seen and heard and read about conditions at the Dilley Detention Center, where children are being detained right now?
Thank you so much, Senator Blumenthal, for also caring so deeply about these issues and for caring about children in immigration detention. The conditions at the Dilley Detention Center are deplorable. Children there do not have access to sufficient clean drinking water. They do not have access to nutritious food. As I've mentioned, they found live worms, bugs, and mold in their meals. They do not have access to appropriate medical care. As I mentioned, Camila, who's over there, lost hearing in one ear after an ear infection. Amalia, who's 1 year old, she nearly died. Kanek, who has severe autism, was increasingly distressed in detention. These are just 3 examples out of many hundreds of cases where children aren't being given appropriate medical care at Dilley. But it goes beyond that, Senator Blumenthal. There is needless cruelty at the detention center. On Thanksgiving Day, children and families were brought into a large room, and there was a table that had turkey on it, pies, pastries, and beautiful food, and the children were so overjoyed. They thought that on Thanksgiving, for this one holiday, they would also be able to enjoy a feast. And then the staff covered each tray of food and told the children that the food was for the employees only, and children were left in tears. Something similar happened on Christmas. Children and families were brought again into a large room. A person came into the room dressed as Santa Claus, and every child was given a bag of treats. The first treats that many of them had been able to hold in weeks. And photos were taken of all the kids with Santa Claus. The kids thought they would get to eat their treats in their little bags, and then every bag was taken away from every child, leaving them weeping.
You know, my time has expired. There is a lot more to say about these issues. We're going to be having another forum, spotlight forum. We're not allowed to call them hearings as such. Next week, the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation. We've had some hearings already on ICE whistleblowers, on U.S. citizens who have been detained illegally, some of them shot, dragged from cars, in effect incarcerated without access to phone, all of these kinds of abuses and illegalities, but none strikes me more than the effect on children, who, as you've so eloquently described, are in formative years where this kind of experience can have a lasting traumatic impact. And so, again, my thanks for being here today. We are continuing to fight efforts that the administration is making to eliminate the Flores agreement, which sets limits and guardrails in Flores versus Bondi, which is pending in the Ninth Circuit. We've done an amicus brief. These legal issues are very important, and I hope that the high school students who are with us today maybe will consider going to law school, because I can't think of anyone who would be better advocates in a courtroom as you are here today. So thank you all, and thanks again, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Blumenthal. Thank you personally for the kind words that you mentioned earlier. I'm going to ask a few questions. Did you vote the second vote? Yeah, I haven't. I'm going to ask a few questions of several members of the panel here. Samia, I take it you're Somali?
I am.
Well, I want to join Senator Blumenthal in telling you how painful it was to hear the President of the United States refer to you and your people as garbage. He said it over and over again. I wasn't surprised. Nothing surprises me anymore that comes out of his mouth. I was sitting in the Oval Office in his first term, the only Democrat in a group of about 20 members of Congress and the Senate and others, when I heard the president say, and please forgive me for quoting him directly, about shithole nations. I couldn't believe it for a moment to think that a president of the United States would use that kind of language in the highest office of our land. He did, repeatedly, and then denied it until just a few months ago when he admitted publicly, yes, he did say it. He was referring not to you personally, but to people of color who come to this country and have made this a great nation. I'm sorry. Can you tell me what the reaction was in your community?
I mean, something that I love about the Somali community in Minnesota is that we fought back with these remarks by making it seem like a joke, which was incredible to see. We came together, first of all, as a community, and we didn't take him seriously. Obviously, the emotions at first were hurt, anger, and I still feel that to this day. But if anything, it brought our community closer together, and it allowed us to advocate for ourselves, not only in the state legislature, but me now in front of the United States Senate Judiciary Committee. But something, again, the Somali community in Minnesota is probably one of my favorite things about my home state in Minnesota. And Somali people obviously are not the derogatory things that our president has said. The Somali community is kind, they are considerate, they are powerful. Most of them escaped a civil war. They hold power, they hold resilience, and they threw away the fear. So our community just is that powerful.
Well, I will tell you that you're amazing. To be a high school student and come before us as you have in so many different venues and be so articulate. Dr. Fortuna, what do you make of these children as they grow up with this life experience, hoping for the best that they physically survive? Mentally, what do they face?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to make sure we pay attention to is absolutely the environments and when we're talking about the guardrails of really not having this violent experiences. because I'm really impressed with what Samia is saying. Communities will come together to support children, and that is our resilience, right? As a multicultural community in this country, where people will surround themselves around children and try to protect them, and that's what communities are trying to do, and that's our strength, I would say. So I really want to underline that. But at the same token, what we know is that chronic exposure to things that are, to be honest, explicitly racist and xenophobic and dehumanizing, we know through history and science and the world that those things can really result in trauma and depression and actual psychiatric disorders for children, especially when they are bombarded with this negative messaging that they are hearing about that. We know that identity and support and belonging are critical for human development. We have clear empirical research that shows that when children and adolescents are overly exposed to racism and dehumanizing comments, that it does have an impact on their identity formation, their sense of self, and can create very significant mental health disorders for children, especially when they're not receiving the supports, which is why I think you're seeing that those of us who care about children, from psychologists to teachers to community members, are trying to wrap around and protect those children, because that's the most protective thing that we can do. But it's becoming a very difficult thing to sustain because of the intensity and the gravity of the assault on our children.
Thank you. Ms. Mukerjee, I think what you told us earlier is you have 15 clients that you represent.
In total, I've represented 68 children and families who've been detained at Dilley over the past year, and I'm currently representing 12 children and their parents who are detained right now at Dilley.
I'm over time, so I want to turn it over to my colleagues who've waited patiently. But I want to ask you one question. Where is the guard, the safeguard, the recourse? It can't be a habeas petition that takes so long and you have so many steps. What can we put into these facilities to provide the most basic protection of those who are detained, particularly the children?
There is no need ever to detain asylum-seeking children. Detention is never appropriate for children. The American Academy of Pediatrics and every major medical association has condemned family detention because it's just not necessary. There are alternatives to detention programs that are far more cost-effective and humane than detaining children.
Thank you. I'm going to leave and vote and say to my colleagues, Senator Mastos, Senator Merkley, and Senator Van Hollen, each take 5 minutes, and I'll ask the staff if you follow the rules. Okay?
Thank you. Senator Durbin, first of all, let me just thank you so much and your staff for putting together this important spotlight hearing, and then every single one of you had the opportunity to listen to your opening remarks. And thank you, number one, for your advocacy and what you're doing at this moment in time. Thank you, Samia and Leah. Very brave. You represent the best of who we are, as our future and our country, and I think I'm so proud that you're here and using your voices. I come from Nevada. We have a very large Latino population there. But it's not just our Latinos. We have a very strong AAPI community as well. 8% of the children in Nevada live with at least one undocumented family member. One undocumented family. That's thousands of families in Nevada. And I was struck by the conversation, doctor and professor, about detention and what it does to our kids. As an attorney, I have learned through the law, in the United States, we look out for the best interests of our kids. And that means we don't lock them up. We actually figure out how to protect them and ensure that they have those comforts, and we are looking out for their best interests moving forward. For some reason, this administration has decided that is something this country will not do with immigrant children. There's no difference in my mind A child's here in the United States, we treat them all equally. And detention is never the answer. Never, ever, ever the answer. We all know that, but this administration doesn't. I was struck, Doctor, by some of your comments earlier, and I want you to elaborate on this. We know the impact it is having to our children who have at least one family member who is an immigrant. But you also talked about what it is doing to kids who are U.S. citizens who don't have family members, right, that are undocumented. And I think that is crucial for us and people to understand how it spreads, the fear spreads, because of the color of their skin. And kids don't make a distinction. Can you talk a little bit more about that? They don't make a distinction under the law that they're safe somehow. If they look just like their neighbor or friend, they have similar concerns, and how devastating that is to our families overall.
Yes. I think that's a really important point. Thank you, Senator. What we're really seeing is that obviously this is a horrible way to treat our immigrant communities and our immigrant children, but you make a very important point, the importance of taking care of all of our children, adolescents, and families in this country. They should not be exposed to these things. And I am hearing more and more, especially among young people of color who are citizens, who don't even have they're not first generation or even second generation immigrant, who are fearful of going out because they do worry about it. One very sad illustrative thing, and then I'll talk a little bit about the mental health consequences of a friend that told me that her son has really created has developed a lot of anxiety about going out and having his skin appear so that people could see the color of his skin because he's fearful. And he feels scared to have people see him. He feels he's struggling with a lot of doubt and concerns about his identity and the color of his skin. And he's a younger child, but he is actually going out trying to sort of wear things that cover him because he's afraid. And there's a couple of things there. One, he's afraid that he might be attacked. He's afraid and taken. He's afraid that his family might be taken. And he's also afraid that he might be targeted by others, because another thing that happens is that some of the hate language and the fear language can also propagate through communities, and children are experiencing direct targeting and racist, communications towards them. And we have had cases in this country where children have died by suicide in the course of these kinds of feelings. It creates a tremendous amount of toxicity. We know biologically that it creates a level of stress that our bodies are, the children's bodies are constantly under, that can actually create, psychiatric disorder that can be persistent and longstanding, as well as having a negative impact on their physical health. A lot of the things that we've heard even in the detention, part of that is the conditions, and absolutely those conditions are deplorable. But you also are having children who are in extreme stress and trauma, which also has a very negative impact on their minds and bodies. So we are creating direct distress and disease on our children.
Right. And I know my time is up. Let me just say a couple of things. And Maria, thank you. I've heard from so many of our teachers in Nevada who feel the same way you do. Protecting our kids, making sure we're looking out for their best interests. I thank you for your advocacy. I just have one final question. And Professor, let me just ask you, is there any reason why these families should be detained?
No.
Yeah, that's it. That's the answer. And I think many of us are so frustrated because this is not necessary what's happening in our country right now. And it is right for all of us to take action, be advocates, look out for the best interests of our neighbors, stand up, whether it's in the courts or in our communities or what we can do immediately because of the impact that this administration is having. And there's no reason for it other than to continue to promote some form of hate or racism in this country. I thank you all for standing strong. Thank you for being here.
Yes, I'll echo those thanks. And Ms. Mukerjee, I missed the opening statement, so I apologize. You may have addressed this, but is the Flores agreement still in place that set a limit on the detention of children?
Thank you so much for your question, Senator Merkley. The Flores Settlement Agreement was reached in 1997, and it continues to be binding on the federal government in providing protections to all children in immigration custody, regardless of whether they're accompanied by a parent or not. The Trump administration has moved to terminate that Flores Settlement Agreement, but that motion was denied by a federal district court, and the case is currently on an expedited appeal before the Ninth Circuit.
Isn't it the case that despite not yet having been able to dismiss that settlement, the Trump administration is routinely violating it and keeping children for more than 20 days?
Yes, Senator, more than 900 children have been detained beyond the 20-day limit over the past year.
Why is it, given this settlement, that we can't force them to stop doing this?
We should force the Trump administration to abide by the Flores Settlement Agreement. Unfortunately, in the immigration space, the Trump administration has repeatedly violated both federal law and the U.S. Constitution.
It was very disturbing during the first Trump administration. I was the first member of Congress to go down and witness the children being separated from their parents. Then I visited all of the detention centers, visited children in each one, and that we are back in this world of abusing children as official government action, violating the law in the process, but more importantly, damaging children. I just want to emphasize that this is it's not just unethical, it is inhumane, it is wrong to hurt children, and this administration is hurting children. Is that a fair thing for me to say?
Yes, Senator.
And Maria, thank you for your role in teaching, and in your testimony you describe an attack with tear gas outside your classroom, lots of measures that you all had practiced to try to protect your students and the community, and the community responded, but that there are after effects that you've witnessed, including a panic attack of one of your students, a student who is a citizen. And that's what I wanted to, all the students are impacted, even if they're citizens. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I've spoken with my class of first graders who are 6 and 7 years old, and many of them expressed what some of the panelists have described today, where they're worried that the color of their skin alone or their family member's skin alone will qualify them for detention or lead them to being stopped on the street by immigration agents.
And in addition to stress at school, many children are not coming to school because of the concern that they might be picked up, or their parents maybe walking with them might be picked up. Is that also right?
Correct, especially during the execution of Operation Midway Blitz. We had many, many families reach out to teachers and staff and let us know that they wouldn't be coming to school that day or that week because they were too afraid to walk their children to school.
Has that changed now?
Slightly, as immigration enforcement has kind of gone down a bit in Chicago after the Blitz, but not completely, and the whole community has remained on edge. The parents have been working to communicate with each other to figure out walking school buses and coordinate with union members on that as well, so that they have a better sense of safety when their children are commuting to school.
Well, our schools have plenty of challenges already. The after effects of COVID, the growing role of smartphones affecting socialization and kind of attention spans, but this is another huge stress on our children that is one in being inflicted by the policies of this administration.
Yes, absolutely. If it's okay, I have a letter from one of our 6th graders I'd like to share with you about the impact that it's had on her. Dear Senate, my experience of what's happening with ICE is horrible. It's terrible how people that immigrated to the United States of America can't have liberty. You can't even go to the store and buy a can of soup because you're scared ICE is going to get you. Where is the justice for all? Now people don't go out to celebrate a special event. Long ago, where my school is located, something happened and it was terrifying. ICE was outside and everyone was scared and they were throwing stuff. They didn't even care that there was a school in front of them and there were kids inside. Our community should not be going through this. It's really sad how kids get far apart from their parents or family. It's unfair. Babies and kids are too little to be going through this. Kids need liberty. I feel broken because my community is falling apart. In my opinion, I think they should give us our freedom. People came here to have a better life, and this is the life they got. It's so unfair.
Was that one of your first grade students wrote that?
This was one of our sixth graders.
Oh, your sixth graders, okay. I was going to say that first grader needs to be promoted. Promoted a couple grades, I'd say. Thank you all for being champions for America's children.
Let me thank all of you. I'm Chris Van Hollen. I represent Maryland in the Senate, and grateful that all of you are here to tell your stories. And to Samia and Leah, thank you for your testimony. I think as Senator Blumenthal may have mentioned earlier, Samia, we are all repulsed by the outrageous attacks launched by Donald Trump and others on the Somali American community. So please know that here you are strongly supported and embraced. We've talked about the fact that many children have been detained. We've also talked about the trauma many children experience as they've seen family members torn away. And Dr. Fortuna, we are coming up on about the 1-year anniversary where in Maryland, DHS officials snatched Kilmar Brago Garcia off the streets of Maryland, just disappeared him to El Salvador. Nobody knew exactly where he was. His wife and family didn't know if he was alive. But when he was snatched, he had his 5-year-old son in the car with him who witnessed essentially the abduction of his father. I know it may be hard to speak to that particular case because you don't know exactly what's going through that 5-year-old's mind. But as somebody who's an expert on child trauma, can you just talk about the impact that kind of experience can have on a child?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator, for that question. You know, what we know in child development as child psychiatrists or psychologists is that, as you can imagine, children are absolutely dependent on the well-being of their caregivers and their family. The people around them that take care of them are their complete security in the world. So that's one thing. And so to see someone that is your parent being taken down and harmed, for a child, it is an immediate sense of death of a parent, you know, especially when the parent is taken away. The child a 5-year-old does not have a way to process it cognitively other than to say, my parent is dead and they're taking them from me. And a very bad person has come and taken away my whole life from me. For a child at 5 years old, that is essentially almost perceiving your own death and future, right? Because you're completely reliant on those individuals. And it is a tremendously scary thing that children cannot process at all cognitively. I mean, it's hard for adults, right, to be able to see that. But a child has no way of orienting what is happening other than something very, very bad has happened and I'm at risk and I think my parent is dead. And that creates a tremendous amount of separation and attachment and all kinds of sort of very difficult emotions for children that is very difficult for them to process.
And possibly long-lasting harm.
Yes, long-lasting harm, especially in a very vulnerable developmental stage. And that's what we think about in psychiatry, that there are these very important developmental stages in early childhood and even in adolescence, where experiences like that can have tremendous impact on our ongoing relationships, development, and even cognitive learning.
Well, thank you. And, you know, multiply his case thousands of times over and you get a picture of what's happening to so many kids. Ms. Mukerjee, I want to recount a case that just came to our attention in Maryland on Friday, because it, I think, highlights the inhumanity of these policies. I also want to ask your opinion on whether there's any legal recourse here. So this past Friday, a mother of 2 children, ages 4 and 10, was refused even the filing of a stay of removal at our local ICE office in Baltimore. The 4-year-old is blind, deaf, and suffers from other disabilities which require serious medical care that is not available in El Salvador, which is where they plan to deport them and did deport them. So removing him would put his life in danger. The mother has a humanitarian parole application pending, but ICE did not care. And both the mother and the 2 children were put on a deportation flight on Friday at BWI Airport less than 24 hours after being taken into custody, and they were sent back to El Salvador. Can you just talk, the inhumanity of that case is clear. Can you talk about the legal issues, or whether this is something that is just being exploited by ICE and they are able to do? This is a person who did have a humanitarian parole application pending.
Thank you so much, Senator Van Hollen. That is a tragic, tragic story. And unfortunately, there are versions of that story taking place every day across the country with children who have very special and serious needs being deported from the United States, being held in detention when they shouldn't be in detention at all. When a person has a pending application for a form of humanitarian relief, such as asylum or withholding of removal or Convention Against Torture relief, the person shouldn't be deported from the United States. I don't know all the intricacies of the case that you're discussing, but when a child has such serious medical needs, historically, administrations, Republican or Democrat, would take the child's needs into account and would use discretion to allow the child to stay in the United States and not deport families where children are so gravely in need, where children have cancer, where children are suffering so badly. That is not what is consistent with the best values of this country, and it is immoral, if not illegal and unconstitutional.
Well, I appreciate your comments. It clearly is inhumane and immoral, and sadly, cruelty seems to be part of the point from this administration. I guess the only saving grace is the American people, majorities of the American people, as they witness what's happening. They really don't like what they're seeing. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Van Hollen. The senator from Illinois, Senator Duckworth.
Thank you to the senior senator from Illinois, Senator Durbin.
I was about to say it, and I thought, not for long. Go ahead.
Well, I want to thank my senior senator, mentor, and friend for putting together this very important Spotlight Forum. As everyone in this room knows by now, President Trump and his cronies have a very strange obsession with Chicago in particular. It must be something about our vibrant food and amazing food and vibrant communities full of friendly people, all of our neighborhoods with different ethnicities must scare him. Because even before he was sworn in for his second term, he had already singled out Chicago as one of his primary targets. And at various points, he said that Chicago would be, in his words, ground zero for mass deportations and in quotes, a training ground for our military. And in September of last year, they made good on that promise when they launched the so-called Operation Midway Blitz, ridiculously titled assault on our communities full of violence and sloppy, error-ridden raids. Our Chicago school students, who would have only been back to school for less than a month at that point, were immediately put into danger. Not only were these kids seeing their friends, family members, and neighbors being attacked, kidnapped, and harassed, they themselves were being swept up in raids. And I think one of the most egregious examples of this administration's cruelty has to be the indiscriminate deployment of tear gas near our schools. Think about that. A chemical irritant that I, as a soldier in an active war zone, was legally prohibited from using against foreign combatants. Let me say this again. I was not allowed, as a soldier in a war zone, to use tear gas against enemy combatants. And yet they were deploying it next to our schools. I want to say to Leah and Samia, let me ask you, Leah and Samia, as a high school student, what would have happened to you if you and your friends were caught smoking cigarettes or vapes on school property? Samia and Leah?
Yeah, I can go first on this. So we would get in so much trouble. This is actually something that our principal has been trying to fix for a long time, because substance abuse has been an issue with high schoolers for a long time. And that should be one of our main focuses, to actually fix that issue in schools. We would get in so much trouble, and protocols literally in Minnesota, mandated by the Minnesota Department of Education. Schools have to have penalties in place for students who are caught using cigarettes, e-cigarettes, or any type of drug on campus.
Leah?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I agree, we would most definitely be in big trouble. There is, I believe, zero tolerance policies in Chicago public schools, and I've seen firsthand how schools have dealt with that. So most definitely, we would get in trouble.
Right. And it doesn't just apply to students, right? Maria, as a teacher, could you or any other adult smoke or vape on school property?
No, I'm pretty sure we would be fired.
Exactly. For good reason, right? In Illinois, any use of cigarettes or vapes within 15 feet of any school property is illegal, and the rules are even more strict for illicit drugs. The sad irony is that Gregory Bovino, the so-called commander-at-large of the Border Patrol, wouldn't be allowed to light up a cigarette on school property, and yet he and his goons felt fully justified in tossing canisters of tear gas near our schools and playgrounds, forcing children to shelter inside as their schools go into lockdown. We as a society can agree that alcohol, tobacco, and drugs should be kept away from our schools, but apparently we draw the line at chemical weapons that are not allowed to be used in a combat zone. Weapons that are known to cause burning, pain, and skin inflammation, temporary blindness, and respiratory distress. I even pointed out this contradiction to our Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, and in a letter, I asked her to actually do her job and stand up for our students by calling on DHS to stop all immigration enforcement within 1,000 feet of our public and private schools, the same distance specified in federal drug-free school zone laws. She didn't even bother to respond, because protecting children has never been a priority for this administration. And that brings me to my next point. In the fall, when our children should have been worrying about regular kid problems like what homeroom they were placed in or who they might ask for the homecoming dance, they were instead worrying about whether they or a loved one could be snatched up by masked goons. For months, federal agents who should have been busy going after murderers and terrorists and investigating actual crimes were instead roaming our streets, opening fire on innocent people, lobbing tear gas at peaceful crowds, shooting pastors in the head with pepper balls, and assaulting and arresting people indiscriminately, including daycare workers, elected officials, and journalists. We saw a 15-year-old U.S. citizen getting arrested and held for hours without the ability to contact their families. They raided a South Shore apartment complex, rappelling out of helicopters and going door to door to pull residents out of their homes in the middle of the night at gunpoint. And in fact, they requested the use of the military's helicopters, and the military said no, because it would have been illegal. And in fact, they used DHS's own helicopters. Could you imagine being one of the kids in that building, then having to go back to school the next day as if that is normal? Because it's not normal. I'm the mother of two daughters, a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old. They've taught me firsthand, sometimes to my chagrin, that a child's developing brain picks up everything. So what happens if we replace the normal stressors of childhood with all the trauma associated with these violent immigration raids? What happens when our children have to worry that when their friend misses a day of school, it's because they or their parents could have been detained, deported, and disappeared? Or if they have to worry that if they try to catch the school bus in the morning, DHS agents might spray them in the face with chemical weapons or drag them away from their families. And we caught DHS agents following school buses in their SUVs in Chicago. Dr. Fortuna, what kind of damage does a state of constant fear and anxiety have on a young person's development?
Well, thank you for that question. And first, I just want to thank you for creating that sort of link between the military and what's happening on our streets. What I would suggest is that what young people are experiencing in those settings and in those circumstances that you're describing, they might as well be in a war zone, right? And if you can imagine being yourself, having been in the military, having children there side by side with you, experiencing the things that you and your colleagues might have been experiencing. It has a tremendous amount of what we call in psychiatry traumatogenic power, and those types of things that create the type of fear and terror and distress and complete understandable fear for one's own life and bodily integrity and that of the people that we love. That's what kids are experiencing under those circumstances. And we know that those can result in disorders like post-traumatic stress disorder that we see in soldiers. So that's where we're seeing, again, that connection to being in a war zone, where you actually start becoming hypervigilant and having a tremendous amount of anxiety. What impact does that have on childhood? It can have a tremendous impact on a trajectory of ongoing chronic problems with anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. Even with treatment, it can be very difficult and challenging, and in their development. And children cannot learn and attend to school and develop when they're in this massive state of fear. And in this case, it's very understandable fear. And it can have impact also long-term, even on their bodies. We know that there's communities that experience this type of violence that have increased cortisol and stress hormones, in their bodies all of the time, and that has all those cognitive things that I'm talking about, as well as can create more medical problems for them in the long run as well.
Thank you. That's lasting damage is exactly what brings me to my next point. The sad truth is that while President Trump claims his agents are deploying to our cities to target the worst of the worst, all they're doing is being the worst of the worst and causing unnecessary trauma to some of the youngest and most vulnerable people in our communities. And so many of our colleagues across the aisle who were quick to point out the negative mental health impacts of COVID-19 lockdowns, right? They were worried about the lockdowns and what it did to people's mental health. These are the same people who've been completely silent when it comes to the impacts of indiscriminate immigration enforcement on our students. This truly is a crisis, and my heart breaks for all the children who will carry these scars with them for their entire lifetime. These are Illinois' children, my constituents, and they certainly deserve better. Thank you, Dick.
Thanks, Senator. And I don't know if any of our colleagues will join us. We've had a great turnout. They come and go, but that's the nature of the Senate. The fact that they're here is critically important. Thomas Friedman is a well-known writer, lots of books, lots of articles, and he just wrote a lengthy piece this weekend about his home state of Minnesota. And he basically credited the people of Minnesota in the coldest part of the winter of turning out in peaceful demonstrations, 50,000 people marching in the streets. And he concluded, and I think rightly so, that Minnesota got the best of this president and his administration when they reacted to the terrible killing of innocent people in the streets and all the other things that were happening. I read that article and I thought to myself, you should have mentioned Chicago, because in Illinois and Chicago, we stood up too. We may not have had 50,000 people at one time, but boy, over time we had many, many more. And Leah, I still remember going to your high school. And what I remember is you and the fact that you stepped up and said, we're going to do something to protest this. And you led the procession to the arch for the little village, I suppose. Is that where it was? 27th Street?
Yes, on 26th Street
26th.
at the Little Village Arch. I remember during this time, my friend, like I mentioned in my testimony, her cousin and her uncle got targeted by ICE agents, and an ICE agent even put his knee on her cousin's neck while he yelled that he was a citizen. And I remember seeing so many students, so many classmates of mine gone for weeks and weeks on end because they were scared. They couldn't even learn because what was going on at home. They couldn't learn because that they had so many things on their mind. And I was so sick and tired of living in constant fear. Me, as a citizen, I took a passport every day just because I was scared that I look Mexican, that they might stop me and they might take me. Just because I speak Spanish, they can take me, you know? And so I had told my friend, I was like, I'm tired of this. I want things to change. And I asked her, if I walk out, will you walk out with me? And she said, yes. And less than a week, we got over 500 students to come attend, 89 plus community members, and 50 businesses to come support us, including CPD and including the press. This is what made Chicago, what happened in Chicago and other cities, known, because over here it's easy to not know what's going on because there's such a difference. There's peace. There was peace here when there was war over there, and like one of our panelists mentioned, it did feel like a war zone. It did feel like every day I was in this constant state of fear of whether or not I'm gonna walk home and get home, or if I have to say goodbye to my friends just because their parents came here not the right way, they can't live here when they have built their lives here for multiple years. And that's why I decided to do what I did, because even though I am a citizen and I have no reason to worry, it does not matter if you're a white, if you're a brown, if you're a black, it does not matter what language you speak or what country you come from. Nobody deserves what is happening to the immigrants or the citizens that have dealt with this. Over 9 people died this year just because of ICE. And that isn't right. Nobody deserves to die just because of the color of their skin. And we fought for that back in the 1950s, and we're going backwards. So that's why I decided to do it, and I'm going to continue to speak up. So, yeah.
I noted the fact, Senator, and we should all note the fact, and I talked to her about it privately afterwards. This was led by the Latinas.
Yes. The group that led the Little Village Lawndale walkout was fully female-led, fully. We as women of color, and sitting here full of a panelist of women, we are powerful, we are strong, and we are going to make our voices heard.
There was a young lady there. I was touched by her as she broke down in tears in your classroom when she talked about her father.
Yes.
Who was not documented.
Mm-hmm.
And although she is legal,
Mm-hmm.
she thought what it meant to her whole family if he was living in fear or, God forbid, was detained or
Mm-hmm.
sent to some other place. I would just say in conclusion here that there's a lot to be sad about in this country. There's a lot to be hopeful about, too. And what you and Samia and all of you have done coming forward today to tell this story is a reminder to the rest of the country that there's real, genuine goodness and a feeling of fairness and justice that motivates us as Americans. They can't take that away from us if we don't let them. So thank you for being here. And is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion? Thank you very much. This spotlight hearing will stand adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.